Okay, so lovely to have everyone with us. As Leanne said, this is the more interesting part. We do the AGM for due process, and that's important. But what's really lovely about our group here in the North East is to actually work with people in different sectors and hear what different people are working in and what different sectors are like. Because many of us have only worked in one sector, but as we're going to hear this evening, some people have changed sectors. Some people's sectors are changing a lot. So even if they worked in the same sector, things are changing. So to introduce myself, I'm Susie Williams. I'm the secretary of our North East Committee. And in my day job, I work as an academic liaison librarian at the University of Sunderland. So it's with great thanks that we have 6 volunteers from our committee this evening. I think that's amazing to have 6 speakers from one committee on one evening, who kindly offered to give you an insight into what it's like to work in their sector. So each speaker, just to explain how it's going to work, has been given a maximum of 5 minutes to share with us about their sector. Now, we appreciate this challenge. You know, how do you sum up your job, your sector in 5 minutes? But it's just to, and I can see some people looking a bit worried on the screen, but it's just to give us a flavour. So we want to remind speakers they've only got 5 minutes. I can't kind of ring a bell electronically because that might hurt anyone who's got you know, headphones in their ears. So we just ask everyone to meet your 5 minutes. So what we're going to do is we're going to have 3 of our speakers talk, one after the other, and that will be followed by a Q&A session. So as people talk, if you think about any questions you have, please pop them in the chat. Our colleague Melanie is managing the chat, so she'll see those questions. Or you could save them up and you can ask them in that Q&A period. Then we will have our second batch of 3 speakers, then followed by a Q&A for them as well. So if you've got your question, you can either ask it in the chat and Melanie will read that out during the Q&A, or if you want to speak, you can use that raise a hand function, which Leanne was using earlier. A reminder that we are going to be recording the lightning talk section of this evening and putting them on our social media channels. So you'll be able to look at those. So if you're not happy for your video to be on, feel free to turn your video off at this point. We will finish promptly. We'll finish way before 7, but just in case anyone has got their tea on or something like that. But we want to have plenty of time, depending on any of the questions that you might have this evening. So the other thing to mention, if you just have at the back of your mind, is we would love this evening for someone to write up a little article for our blog. Our blog is one of the things that Leanne manages for us as part of her role as our digital champion. And Melanie is sitting in the chat and she would love if someone here would be happy to help in this way. What it would be is just a short article saying what you thought about the talks, if anything particularly struck you. If you're doing professional registration at any of the levels, this might be a way of reflecting on you joining our event this evening and contribute towards that, enhancing your knowledge of the wider professional context. Or you might just like writing and want to share with other people in the region about your experiences this evening. So if you'd like to offer to write a short blog post for us, please do let Melanie know in the chat, and then I can liaise with you direct about that. If you're following us on Twitter, Louise is managing our Twitter account this evening, and she would love to see your comments appearing there. So if you want to join Louise on Twitter, please do that. So without further ado, I shall introduce our first group of speakers. So I'll introduce Jackie first. So Jackie is a Library and Knowledge Services Lead for Northumbria Healthcare NHS Foundation Trust, which must be the longest job title, Jackie. And she's going to give us a quick tour of a library service that stretches from North Shields to Berwick via Cramlington, Hexham and Ashington. So Jackie, over to you. And next slide, please, Leanne.
Yeah, and anyone who knows me knows I can talk for hours, so 5 minutes is a challenge, but I'm about to start my timer. Okay, so I'm going to start it now. Yeah, Jackie McGuire, and I'm Library and Knowledge Services Lead for Northumbria Healthcare NHS Foundation Trust. I thought I'd start with just a bit of information about the trust itself for those who don't really know much about health libraries. we have a huge geographical area and a population in 2021 of 529,600 people. So these people are mainly concentrated in the southeast of Northumberland and North Tyneside, which you can see on the green map. And that's where our three main hospitals are, in Ashington, North Shields and Cramlington. Also some smaller hospital in Blythe and an NHS centre in Morpeth. But Northumberland's got a huge rural population, although at the minute we're well outnumbered by sheep, apparently. About 1.2 million sheep and lambs compared to 320,000 people. But to the west of this sort of map, that rural population is served by hospitals in Hexham and Haltwhistle, and in the north we have hospitals in Rothbury, Alnwick and Berwick. So the Trust is a huge employer across all of these sites as well. A huge amount of roles, you know, not only nursing and medical, but a lot of admin, a lot of porters, a lot of domestic staff, a lot of clerical staff. Nursing is our biggest staff group with, you know, 2,741 nurses and midwives. A surprisingly small number of doctors. I think people are quite surprised that there are so few doctors in, you know, a trust of this size. And like I said, as many admin, clerical, estates, ancillary staff to make up that 10,600 staff. We also have a lot of students at any one time, you know, over 600 students at any one time in the trust to deal with. So where do libraries and library staff fit into this huge area and all of these different people doing different roles? Currently we have 2,790 users of the library service. So there are active users at the minute. We can't be everywhere with these staff because there's staff in Berwick, there's staff in Haltwhistle, there's staff in North Shields. There's only 9.1 full-time equivalent library staff. So what we need to do is just enable easy access to all of these staff and students to the resources and the services that we are offering them. And like every other library service who's on here, we do that now with a mix of physical and online services. Physical libraries at the four main sites, so one in North Tyneside, one in Wansbeck, one in Cramlington, one in Hexham. Because there aren't that many staff across even the four physical sites, all of my staff are very knowledgeable and they're all very flexible. So we work together as a close team to do the jobs that we do. We have a lot of staff who are on courses, needing training, needing resources, and a lot of these staff are returning to education, returning after long gaps of studying. So we have healthcare assistants who haven't studied for a long time, who are now doing trainee nurse training, and they come to us with few skills, needing a lot of support. They have very different needs to our full-time students who are on placements. We've learned that we need to offer a personal approach to these staff, and they're really appreciative of the time and support that we do give them to help them work and study at the same time. Most of them are working as well as studying. The medical students, they're a different breed, and I think they're more appreciative of the free tea, coffee and biscuits that we give them in our libraries. We see a lot of them. They're really, you know, they're a real buzz when our medical students especially are studying in our library, so we love to have them. We also have a lot of staff needing articles and other information to support patient care. We have a lot of staff who read. We have a lot of health and wellbeing books. We have a lot of reading groups. We have a lot of book club books. So we have a lot of literature to help our staff broaden their horizons and relax as part of their health and wellbeing. Finally, my role in this, it's sort of hard to summarize it because it's just a lot of different things, different every day. Answering inquiries, literature searching, coaching. I review a lot of clinical guidelines, HR management. The picture you see there, that was taken 3 years ago. There's only 2 people in the same jobs as there was 3 years ago. So much change. I manage a budget of about £450,000 a year, so that's part of my job as well. if you want a job with variety, you like autonomy, you're innovative, it's definitely health libraries are a great place to work, because you do have a chance to be quite autonomous and to innovate things. I've got a 5th library coming on board, so I'm heavily involved with that. And I've just bought myself a new toy, which is a huge big printer, so I can print posters for the libraries and our staff and students going to conferences. So great place to work. If you're a team player, health libraries, come and work as a team, a role which is very varied and a great place to work. And I'm sure I've gone over 5 minutes, but not by much.
Thank you very much, Jackie. And I love your plug for health libraries. That I think that's, you make me go, oh, I miss working. I used to be partly a health librarian when I worked in Northumbria. So I'm kind of missing that part of it, but I just do something different now. So thank you very much, Jackie. You can sit back and relax now, because we're going to move on to our next speaker, who is Sean. So hand over to Sean, and next slide, please, Leanne. And Sean, I'll let you introduce yourself. Over to you.
Hi everyone, I'm Sean. I'm a master's student in Information Science and Library Management at Northumbria University. I also work there as a reading list assistant. Apologies in advance, I'm not the best public speaker, and I'm going to have to apologise that my slide is a little bit more basic than Jackie's. I'm going to talk a little bit about my experience in the voluntary sector. So I started volunteering at Jesmond Public Library in early 2022, just over a year ago, after I was put in touch with a volunteer coordinator by one of my lecturers at Northumbria. Jesmond Library was one of around 500 volunteer-run community libraries in the UK in 2020, though it's likely that the pandemic has affected this. When I first joined, I had no library experience, and indeed very little experience in the customer-facing role. My spell volunteering has allowed me to gain these and other skills and become aware of challenges facing public libraries at the minute, particularly those that are volunteer-run. Like many public libraries, Jesmond Library was forced to close due to spending cuts, but was resurrected by the local community in 2013. The computers and networks used by the library are a relic of its days of Newcastle City Council, and the management software used is a bit more, you'd probably find it more predominantly in the American school system. So as the library doesn't operate under the umbrella of a larger body or council, there's arguably no overarching aim in its collection, which is largely sort of composed of donations, both from locals and from books from the city library. One particular disadvantage of volunteer-run libraries is that there is a danger that insufficiently trained volunteers could then in turn insufficiently train new volunteers, leading to the consolidation of gaps in knowledge. However, despite challenges, Jesmond Library has actually had to stop taking on new volunteers temporarily because of the amount of people willing to give their time and contribute. There's quite a notable mix of volunteers, from sort of both old and young from a variety of professional backgrounds, some with library experience, others with none. However, all share a commitment to chipping in to ensure the library runs smoothly, with many volunteers stepping in at the last minute to fill any slots that might arise so the library can remain open. We sort of volunteers per 2-hour slot to make sure that everyone sort of covers all the bases and that the library is fully staffed in case of sort of fire emergency. So as the volunteers are largely drawn from the local community, there's quite a lot of community engagement. The library cooperates with other local amenities such as the swimming pool, and it provides a space for locals to practice activities such as yoga and mindfulness. It's also currently providing a space for refugees to familiarise themselves with the area and the language, and just sort of become a bit more comfortable in the new location. However, now more than ever, with the cost of living and energy crisis, the library offers a warm and comfortable haven for people. The energy bills have obviously skyrocketed for the library, but in recognition of its place as a hub for community, through donations and the time and energy of the trustees, the library is able to provide a warm space for everyone. The running costs come to around £30,000 per year, which is a particular challenge in the current economic climate. Volunteer-run local libraries like Jesmond, while perhaps not to the extent of council-funded public libraries, are essential for the well-being of their communities, both physical and mental. Without wishing to stir political debate, it's unfortunate that without the time and money of many like-minded volunteers at public libraries, many have had to close, leaving many communities in the northeast without a functioning local library on their doorstep. That's obviously not disregarding the wonderful work done by the public libraries which are currently sort of running. For myself, now working at Northumbria University Library, I'm conscious that I wouldn't have been able to make this career change without the experience and skills that I've gained at Jesmond, which is why I gladly accepted the opportunity towards the end of last year to become a senior volunteer, help to sort of guide and take responsibility for the other volunteers I work with, and to sort of help a bit more with the management software, which I'm trying to sort of bring my professional experience to bear on. That's sort of it. I'm sorry for sort of racing through. I'm a little bit nervous.
That's brilliant, Sean. I've learned so much in like sort of 3.5 minutes that I just didn't know about. I kind of knew that Jesmond had a volunteer library, but that's where my knowledge stopped. So that was really good. And I see that we have some questions that have come up in the chat. So when we get to the Q&A, there might be other things that you can share as well. So thank you very much, Sean. I know you were a little nervous, but that was really, really good. Thank you.
Thank you.
So we now move on to our third volunteer in this first section, who is Joanne. So Joanne is a co-opted person this evening. She's one of Jackie's colleagues. We're very welcome to have you this evening. And Leanne will move the slide on, which is brilliant. So over to you, Joanne.
Thanks, Susie, and hello, everybody. I feel as though Jackie and I are doing a kind of concerted pincer movement pushing NHS libraries tonight. But and I was also hoping we wouldn't say very different things, but I'm hoping we're not going to. I think what we're going to say is going to overlap quite a bit. So I've been a colleague of Jackie's for a long time. I've worked in NHS libraries for 20 plus years, and I now work in a role for Health Education England, which is more about how we develop services regionally and how we work collaboratively to improve access to NHS libraries. So we've got slightly different perspectives on the same thing, really. So I'm going to touch, I'll just make a note of the time. I'm going to touch on a few of the priorities for NHS libraries, not all of them by any means. And then I'm going to talk about some of the good bits and some of the trickier bits about working in NHS libraries. So I'll race on. So for me, at the top of the list of priorities for us is patient care. So the main thrust of our job is to ensure that NHS staff have access to the best evidence available to treat their patients. And the NHS invests in a whole range of evidence-based resources to help with that decision making, some better than others. So a key part of our role is to be experts in accessing, appraising and teaching others to be able to access that information. The second priority is me around health information, and the example on the slide is a good one for this to demonstrate our role. So it's not just the staff who need access to the best evidence, it's also patients, carers and the public, and they need access to the evidence base as well. So a lot of NHS libraries work either directly or more often indirectly through healthcare staff to ensure that patients have access to that best evidence. And linked to that is the whole issue of health literacy, and the link between people who have low health literacy are more likely to have poorer health outcomes. So they're more likely to have long-term conditions, and those long-term conditions are more likely to be life-limiting. So it's that real health inequalities issue, and libraries, NHS libraries and public libraries can have an important role to play in helping people to improve their health literacy and get access to that information. We've got a key role to play in health and well-being, and in particular health and well-being of our own NHS staff. And this has always been the case, and Jackie's service has done a lot of work around this, but I think COVID has really brought this to the fore. The importance of that space that people can use and the whole set of health and well-being resources that are provided has become increasingly important. Knowledge sharing, how do we share the knowledge across organisations? And that might be kind of formal evidence, or it might be more informal knowledge that's in people's heads. So NHS librarians play an important role in making sure that knowledge gets shared, either in technical ways. So Jackie's already mentioned the library service manages all the clinical guidelines, or in more formal ways, just connecting people and giving them opportunities to share their knowledge. Okay, I'm going to be really much faster than this. The good bits, it's not hierarchical. As Jackie says, you get a chance to dip your toes into all kinds, to play to your strengths. We really do get a chance to do anything that we have the skills to do in NHS libraries. That link between the job we do and high quality patient care is really easy to see. So it can be a really rewarding job in that sense. The trickier parts, the NHS is under pressure, as we all know, and whenever the NHS is under pressure, there is pressure on funding, and we are constantly, although there is a clear published evidence base to show that NHS librarians make a difference, we have to keep making that case all the time. The access to our services is not uniform, so people out in primary care have more problems getting access, and there are issues around culture change and making sure that evidence-based practice is embedded across the system. So I'm not sure where I am with time, but I think the way forward for us is to grow the workforce and to work collaboratively at the system level to make sure that access to library and knowledge services is available across NHS and social care. And I think that's probably me. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Joanne. So it's really, and you definitely didn't duplicate what Jackie did. So if you've not planned that, that was very, very well done. So many thanks to Jackie and Sean and Joanne for sharing what we understand is just a wee little insight into the very, very work that all three of you clearly do. So maybe if I can turn to Melanie, who is managing our chat. Are there any questions in the chat, Melanie? If there are, maybe you could read them out and let who know who the question is for.
Yes, sure. So we have a question from Amina, and that is for Jackie. She says, can our Borderline Books project provide free books for the patient libraries?
I'm sure it can. Our patient library service is very much ours to develop the way we want it to develop. The history of it is that I was given, there used to be at North Tyneside a St John's Ambulance patient library. So we got left a room of books. We threw quite a lot of them out because a lot of them weren't suitable. They were either old and tatty, or the subject was just, there was a lot of kind of Mills and Boons rompy type. And I mean, we have kept some of them, but, you know, nobody needs 20 copies of, you know, the Shades of Grey or whatever books at any one time. But yeah, we can shape that however we want. So definitely worth a discussion and looking at how we do this, because, you know, we want to develop something that works across all of our sites as well, so not just based at North Tyneside but across all of the sites. So I'll get in touch.
I've got another question for you, Jackie, and this is from Jennie, who asks, do you get many patients signing up for the library service, and does it provide access to specialist materials about various conditions that perhaps wouldn't be available in public libraries?
Yes and no. Patients can join, patients and carers, so not just patients, but the carers as well can join our libraries. But we do make it clear that we don't buy resources specifically for patients. So we prefer a lot of access to come via the healthcare professionals. Our books and resources aren't really aimed at, there's a lot of patient information out there that is better than you would find in any of our libraries. Our main patient offer is around some of the health and well-being books that we've got, but a lot of literature. We've bought a lot of play-away books. I don't know if anyone's seen them. They're like little cassette books that you can just plug earphones into. So we have these books, they look like books, they're like in cassette, like in video size boxes, but the books themselves are tiny. And we take them to the oncology ward so patients can sit and listen to them while they're undergoing treatment, or in discharge lounges as well. So I think patients can join us, and, you know, we do have patients who join us and borrow stuff, but they do tend to just borrow our self-help books rather than any medical books and things.
This one's for Sean. So Jackie says she needs some tips on recruiting volunteers for a patient library. Got any tips, Sean?
Yeah, I've got some. I see Jennie posted in the group chat as to how the common room recruit volunteers. For Jesmond, it's generally sort of community outreach and word of mouth. Just sort of making ourselves visible, notice boards, stuff like that. Just because just holding events for a local community, they want to sort of give back a little bit. So there's just a sort of circular movement of volunteers there. Sorry, I couldn't give a more adequate answer, to be honest.
That's fine. This is for you again, Sean. This is from Leanne. She says, have you been able to use what you learned working in libraries on your university programme and vice versa?
Well, I better give a good answer here because my lecturer is attending this meeting. So yeah, I definitely have. I'd say the main thing is the consciousness of sort of information and digital literacy, and sort of the idea that people sort of approach it in different ways, and obviously everyone has different levels of sort of information literacy, and working in library you sort of need to cater for it, and sort of there's not a one size fits all approach. So it's about making sure the library user gets the most out of the experience.
I've got a question for Jackie and or Joanne, and this is from Susie. For anyone interested in working in health libraries who doesn't have experience of health, do you have any tips for how to go about this? So, for example, how to gain relevant or appropriate experience?
Do you want to go, Jackie? You're probably. I mean, my answer to that would be that it's highly likely that NHS libraries would welcome people who were happy to volunteer and come and give their time. But I would also check with Jackie that on a practical, on the ground front, that's a good answer.
It's quite difficult to have volunteers. There's so many hoops that you have to jump through to have volunteers in any of our services. Trust volunteers are recruited by our volunteer service. There's a huge volunteer service that recruits them. It's difficult to do that ad hoc, just come for a few weeks and get experience in the NHS, because you've still got to go through all of the checks that they would have to go through. In terms of people coming to work in NHS libraries, you don't really, if you've got library experience, it doesn't have to be in the NHS. My job descriptions all say it's preferred, but we interview people who certainly interview people who don't have it. I think my last 2 library assistants came, actually three if I'm right, came from sectors, universities and public libraries. They didn't come from other health libraries. And, that would be the same for professional staff as well. I would be surprised if I saw applicants from other health libraries when I advertise for staff. You kind of learn it on the job. It's a library service. It's a specialised library service, but you don't need to be that specialised to come and work there. We've all got library management systems. We all do literature search, and we all select resources. I have to select resources for doctors, nurses, porters, catering staff, coaches. You're not going to get those skills without just working on the job. And can I just say to Sean, it has been interesting to hear his, because I remember Biddy talking to us, and I think it was maybe at the Lytton Phil or what's now the Common Room years ago, about volunteer library services. I remember she presented, or one of her team presented on that very much way back at the very start of all of this. So it's really interesting to hear how that has developed over the years. So thank you.
Sean, we've got one about funding for Jesmond Library, whether it relies on fundraising or is supported by the council.
So Jesmond Library is a charity, so it's mostly funded through sort of donations as well as via the trustees, which does sort of lead to a question about the viability of sort of volunteer-run libraries in maybe less sort of well-to-do areas, because obviously with the local community being and this is a broad generalisation, slightly more well-to-do in Jesmond, there is that sort of extra money and extra time to sort of donate and to sort of help give back to the library, which maybe there isn't necessarily in other areas.
Just scrolling through. Thank you, Sean. Yeah, levelling up and inequalities, I can see that's quite an issue. Question for Jackie and Joanne again, about the challenges that you're facing in light of COVID, or the challenges your services are facing.
I'll go first then, Jackie. I think you have more.
I'm busy typing.
It could be an essay.
No.
So I think from a kind of a broader perspective, the biggest challenge I see is access to services. So I think Jackie will talk much more about the health and well-being of staff and the impact that that's had, but I've had less experience of that. I was fortunate to be working at home throughout the pandemic, whereas Jackie's team were in for most of the time. So there's a huge impact on staff in terms of that. But in terms, the biggest issue that I see for NHS libraries at the minute is that we, as I touched on before, we're not reaching everybody, so it's not equitable, the service. There are whole swathes of staff who don't really have access and don't have the culture of evidence-based practice. So I think breaking into that culture, and Jackie's service is currently running a pilot out in primary care, so spreading that access out is our biggest challenge, I would say. But Jackie, I'm sure you would say more in terms of the impact on the teams. And
yeah, I am kind of hoping the chaotic bit of it all has finished. It's not going away, so it will always be part of what we do. We have to think a bit differently. It was chaotic for 12 months, I would say. We had to change so much. We had to change our libraries, and I know we worked from the start. We had to reduce the number of people in libraries. We only worked one at a time. People got stopped on their way to work and questioned by the police. It wasn't a pleasant time to be trying to work then. Obviously, staff were as scared as everybody else was at the start, but we worked in the NHS. We still had staff at work who needed us there and who needed our libraries to work in. We still remains that we're back to full. We're certain we were lucky. We kept our physical libraries. A lot of places didn't because they got took over by other teams. But so our libraries are back to normal. Our staffing is generally back to normal. But certainly things like infection control still plays a big part in a lot. So my 5th library that's busy being built, there's still a lot of health, infection control talks go on about that. You're sort of future proofing now. So the stuff that we did during COVID was like retrospective about how we coped with that. But we're now future proofing for what needs to happen then. Certainly in terms of health and well-being, our staff are still very, very stressed. They're still under an awful lot of pressure. We've the backlogs that are left. There's a lot of staff who've left. So, the staff who are still there, work, incredibly hard. And our spaces are mindful spaces now in libraries. So we get staff coming who are just trying to get away from where they usually work. So they come just to sort of have a bit of time out. And we do provide resources. We're linked to our psychological team. So our self-help books and resources are there. They can be, people are signposted from Oc Health to get stuff from the libraries. And we also work very closely with our health and wellbeing team in terms of what we have to offer and how we can support that wider agenda, for all staff.
Okay, thank you. We do have a couple more questions, but we're going to move on so that we have time for our next group of speakers. But
Thanks,
thank you to our first speakers and for everybody who's asked questions.
Yeah, maybe our first group of speakers could just scan the chat, and if there's a question that someone's asked for you that we've not been able to answer verbally, maybe you could put something in the chat. That would be great. Thank you. So we will now move on to our second set of speakers. So we're going to have Paula, Amina and Jennie in that order. So I will get each speaker to introduce themselves. So over to you, Paula.
Yes, hello, lovely to meet you all. My name is Paula Fitzpatrick, and my 5 minutes is going to differ slightly. I'm not really talking about a role as such. I'm talking about moving from what was really a career in academic libraries to a corporate environment. So just as a bit of background, I worked for the best part of 30 years in academic libraries with a few little jumps in between. But about a year ago, I left Newcastle University, where I'd been working for about 15, 20 years, and moved to, actually I didn't have a job at that time, but I left and quite quickly got offered what is a temporary role with a company called Clarivate Analytics. And just to give a bit of background about them as well, what they do, if you're from an academic background, you will have heard for them. So they supply lots of software, library management systems. They provide Alma, Leganto, Primo, all of those, but they also provide content as well. So really they're an amalgamation of ProQuest, Ex Libris and R8, which does more around IP. Anyway, that's where I moved to. I'm on a temporary contract which got extended. So quite a big change for me. And I want to focus really on three things, which are the highlights, the lowlights, and how to deal with that learning curve. So let's go with the highlights. I think one of the things that surprised me was my background in libraries actually mattered. So this is a company who deals primarily with software. Okay, a part of it is library software, but interestingly, they don't really employ that many librarians. Maybe librarians wrote the software, but somewhere along the way, I think it's certainly from what I've seen, they don't actually employ a lot of librarians. So my experience in academic libraries is quite valuable to them. And on top of that, I think they're a very big company. They're based in America. They sometimes have a bit of a US slant. So I think the UK, because they provide software for the UK, that was valuable as well. So certainly it's nice to see something you've done for most of your life be of some value, because in an altruistic way, you know, I would hope that knowledge that I've got, which isn't anything special, but would go towards helping that software be more relevant for the people who use it. I've had to overcome some kind of personal bête noirs, you know, things I haven't liked doing in the past. So actually I'm not that happy presenting. I don't really like talking to people that I don't really know. But that is basically my job now. That's what I do. I talk to people who I've never met before, mostly virtually. And I've had to get out of that kind of fear of it. So there's an element where I would have liked to stay in my little comfort zone, but I've had to get out of it. And actually, as painful as that is, it's actually good. It's probably a good thing. I've had to learn a lot. Now that's got its positives and minuses, but on the whole, I think it's a positive. This ranges from products I've never really supported at all. Don't know if anyone's heard of Summon, which is really a Primo alternative. Never used it before. Now having to coach other sites in how to get the best out of that product, which is a bit mad. And so the learning curve has been quite steep there. And learning what success means. Sorry, I should have said at the start, I'm trying to rush through because it's 5 minutes. My job title is pretty meaningless. It's called a success consultant. And basically what I do is I coach sites, mainly academic sites, to get the best out of the software they use. So that reading list software, that library management software, I'm working with those sites. Most of the sites are quite new, so they've maybe only had the software for a year or 2 years, and making sure that they've got a vision of what success is and we're helping them get there. That's basically my job. So a big change from what I used to do. I think probably the other highlight is that I haven't done this yet, but I see in the company the ability to write your own job description in a way. If you've got an interest in something, be it data or AI or whatever, you basically can do it. I'm not sure I saw that in my, I feel like this might just be my interpretation, but I feel like in an academic environment, your role was more kind of stymied. Okay, those are the highs. Here are the lows. There's got to be some. I work completely remotely, so I think that wasn't the case before COVID with my type of role, but now I work completely remotely. I would have preferred a hybrid model. You do miss that kind of, even if it's just a day or two a week. I can't talk to the dog all day. He doesn't answer back. So, you know, that kind of contact would be nice. And were this role to come to an end, I would be looking for that kind of hybrid stuff. I was very lucky to be offered this post within about 3 months of leaving Newcastle, but it is a temporary post. And whilst at the time I wanted that element of uncertainty, it can be quite unsettling as well. That's another thing. Clarivate is huge. That would be the other thing. So it's very difficult to navigate, to know who to talk to. Interestingly, even though I thought at the university decisions took a long time to get made, in an institution like Clarivate, things also take a long time to get done. So that can be tricky. I suppose the biggest thing, if I was thinking about it, is that focus on the corporate. So coming from an academic background, suddenly you're talking about market share, total addressable market, annual business reviews, Q1 results, and that was a real shock for me. Every presentation you go to, you know, the first slide is about Q1 results or Q2 results, and that's a bit that takes a bit. In fact, I don't think I'm used to it yet. I'm wrapping up now. Steep learning curve, just about the learning curve. It has been steep, you know, from learning products I've never really worked with before, learning how to coach and work with customers of all kind of, you know, mostly from the UK, but also from places like Denmark and Germany, and they've got a different take on the way things are done, and some formal training as well for those products I don't really know. So on top of your day job, that's been quite challenging. Some things, you know, that I think they've helped with there, fairly basic really, but prioritize. Your customers come first. Even though you've got this training breathing down your neck, you have to prioritize your customer. Ask for help. Time management, I've really had to hold my, I'm not the best, as people can probably attest, but you know, I've had to get better at that kind of element of time management. So in conclusion, it was right for me. It doesn't bite, you know, it feels scary, and I was scared, but it doesn't bite. I've been fortunate, and moving out of your comfort zone is hard, but in the long run, probably good for you. And that's it. Sorry if I rattled through it. 5 minutes feels like pressure.
Thank you very much, Paula. And now we will move on to Amina, who is our next speaker. So next slide, please, Leanne.
Microphone on.
Yeah, you're great.
Timer on. Okay, we started the Multilingual Library after we had some students working at Borderline Books, sorting the books and putting them on shelves, who just happened to remark that we had more books in more different languages than the universities had. And literally that day we stopped giving them away for nothing and decided to make a library. So we already started putting in lending slips and nice old-fashioned style and saving them up. And into 2015, we were able to move into an empty shop in Eldon Garden Shopping Centre. After a few months, I wrote to David Crystal to tell him what we were doing and ask whether he would consider being our patron. I think it took about 2 hours for him to answer yes immediately. We stayed there for 5.5 years. On the 1st of October 2020, we became the first library of sanctuary in the northeast of England, which was approximately 6 months before Newcastle City Library, but they got all they were open at the time, and of course we were in the middle of lockdown. On Valentine's Day 2021, our landlords told us to move ourselves out in 2 weeks. So I just told them, don't be silly, we've got 20,000 books and we're only allowed to have 3 people working in that space at a time. So we got a bit of extra time and we're out by the 6th of May. In the meantime, we considered 15 different locations around Newcastle and Gateshead. We viewed 9 of them, and at last we were given an empty pub right by the Civic Centre in Gateshead. To the best of my knowledge, we're unique in the UK. We've got 120 languages, around 20,000 books. We're not funded by the government or the council. We're very much an amateur library. Most of the people, with the exception of Kate, nobody has any library qualifications. But we do have lots of enthusiasm and lots of people who speak lots of languages, so that's really nice. We've always had given space for language classes and for meetings about, for instance, refugee situations, and as far as possible given support to refugees, and also as far as possible had refugees volunteering with us. And the aim is always to put them together with a native English speaker so that they start learning what I call workplace English, which will be useful if they get a job at some point. We don't impose fines on anybody, but we do tell them if they're really, really late that they will be made to sit in a box of split infinitives while we hurl greengrocers apostrophes at them. And to date, nobody has thought this was unreasonable. Everybody's just perfectly happy with that. Yes, we have a £5 membership fee that show no mercy to students who buy beer because you can afford £5. It's free, obviously, for the volunteers and for anybody awaiting asylum. What do you call it? Approval of their asylum application. And we're unpacking like crazy. At the moment, we've got about 10 volunteers from Newcastle language students helping us. And we've finally found the back wall in the stock room, and we've just received a whole lot of new shelving from Morpeth Library that was closing and had to get it out by today, and we've just got it. So we're kind of rearranging everything, which is why I'm not doing a guided tour, because we had to take the whole place apart again, because we don't have a Jennie Hillyard here to make it work properly. I think I've got 6 seconds, so come and visit just as soon as we're open, and then I'll have time for a haircut.
Excellent timing there, Amina. That's absolutely fascinating. I definitely would want to come and visit.
Good.
So we will now move on to our final speaker. So last but not least, we have Jennie, and I'll leave it over to you, Jennie.
Thank you. So, hello, I am Jennie Hillyard. I am the Library and Archives Manager at the Common Room, previously known to most people as the Mining Institute. The Mining Institute still very much exists. It's just that we needed a new name for the new charity that was taking things forward, including looking after all of the Mining Institute's collections. I've been there since 2006, which I think says how much I enjoy my job, the fact that I'm still there all those years later. So the positives. I love the fact that I have control over my day. For me, that makes my life work. Obviously, I have to do the stuff that we've promised we'll do for the funding, but I do have a lot of flexibility, even within the stuff for the funding. I mean, it's me originally who wrote the funding application, so I shouldn't have promised to do something I didn't want to do if I'm really not looking forward to my day. But particularly as someone with a disability, I really appreciate being able to tailor my day around how I'm feeling and how I'm doing that week. So that is a huge plus for me, because there really is just me. My boss is the chief executive of the organisation and freely admits that she doesn't always necessarily entirely understand what it is that I do, but that she trusts I am doing it right, which is lovely. I also enjoy the fact that I get to do both sides of the job. So I do the inquiry side where someone walks in and says, hello, have you got any books about? But I also do the cataloguing side where I'm dealing with the books coming in. And I think doing the both sides is quite unusual in a bigger organisation. And it does give you a lot of opportunities to link the two things together. Because if you know what people are coming in asking you for, that very much influences how you catalogue it and how you arrange it and all of that kind of stuff. So I think I would struggle now. I'm a cataloguer at heart, don't get me wrong, I love it. But I do think I would struggle now to be in a purely bib services type role. I also love that I have more than just books. I have archive items, I have objects, despite the fact we're not a museum. Some of them just keep sneaking in. And I like having the opportunity to look sideways into those worlds of galleries, libraries, archives and museums, and to go across the whole GLAM sector a bit and interact with them and go to their events and all of that kind of thing. Downsides, well, the obvious one, low budgets. It's nearly always project funding, so it's not always just constant kind of job security, if you like. I'm very lucky to be on a permanent contract. I know that often isn't the case. I had a long time on temporary contracts with the organisation before that point. So there is a lack of job security often and a lot of stress, mainly around cash flow rather than budget. Quite often it's a case of, can you just hang on till next month to order that, please? Does feature. You also are more involved in the wider organisation to a larger extent, I think, which in some ways is lovely. In other ways, not so great. Having to be the in extremis waitress at the dinner, bit more challenging and outside of my skill set. I said I would do it as long as I didn't have to serve the soup. It was fine. There's a lack of other professionals around as well, obviously, for advice in terms of being able to just chat stuff through with people to get that feeling of what you're going to do. But obviously I get that through CILIP North East and other similar organisations, which is probably why I am so keen to be involved in groups like this. The volunteers can also be challenging. I love them very much, but it is hard managing people who don't have to be there. Just keeping track of 54 people's names and their grandchildren's names can be very tricky. And hearing about all of their amazing holidays can also make me pretty envious, which is an unusual downside, if you like. But I couldn't do it without them. They add a huge amount of value to what we offer. I try and make it that they're not ever in charge offering something that should be a member of staff. They're very much adding and creating value added stuff to make stuff better, but the essential service is basically me. Yeah, definitely pros and cons, but that's me. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Jennie. This is just fascinating. I'm learning so much, far more than I thought I would this evening, and that's clearly demonstrated by a number of the questions that are filling the chat. So what I've suggested to Melanie is that she picks one question for each speaker, because we've got 15 minutes left. So at least each person gets the opportunity to answer one question, but you might want to have a look in the chat and see what other questions people have asked. I've just offered that I'm sure people will be happy to contact you outside this session, like if they're interested in working in different sectors. Some of you have put in plugs for you know, maybe you want extra volunteers. I'm sure if there was a stream of people coming to Amina and Jennie, you'd be very happy to. So over to Melanie to highlight a few of the questions that we've had in the chat.
Yeah, I'll start with one for you, Jennie. Do you have any tips for anyone thinking of becoming a solo librarian, and where do you get your professional library support from?
I think being aware of where to find stuff out that you don't know, kind of thing. So when if you're not doing something all the time, it's very difficult to stay on top of the in-depth technicalities of it. If you're not doing it every day, if you suddenly have to come back to it like 6 months, 8 months later, it can be tricky. So yeah, making friends who you can ask those questions to. I love Twitter personally. I'm quite a Twitter person. So being able to tweet something about a really obscure mark field and ask how you use it, that's good. I'm also in some Facebook groups for cataloguers as well, though they tend to be a bit American focused. And I utilise obviously CILIP Northeast and the Archives and Records Association and the National Acquisitions Group as well to kind of reach those other librarians who I know can help.
We've got a question here for Amina from Thiano, who says, what kind of books, fiction and non-fiction, do you hold in your library, and do you accept donations?
I think Amina's popped off to do. Oh, she's just come back. Okay.
Wasn't on my screen.
Sorry.
Amina.
The alarm goes off automatically and blasts my ears off. What was the question?
It's a question from Thiano, who says, what kind of books, so fiction and non-fiction, do you hold in your library, and do you accept donations?
We have pretty much anything in the library. We do accept donations. Some of the big agents are now sending us their foreign language translations, which is lovely. Macmillan are brilliant at sending especially children's books in different languages. I can't count how many editions we've got of the Gruffalo. Certainly 10 Dutch dialects, but just dozens of others as well. So yes, we accept donations. Preferably no more German classics, please. We've got German and French. Each of them have about 2,500 books, and we desperately need to weed them. So I had a German lady here this afternoon. She's been working on the German section, and somebody else does the French. And well, we do. The advantage in this building is especially having been a pub, it's got a great big cellar. So we will be able to have books downstairs which can be accessed but are not taking up space on the shelves. So if students or anyone needs them, we just have to make sure it says clearly in the catalogue where they are. But, you know, that's about.
Thank you. Paula, Andrea asks, how is your own success judged within the company, and how different is it to the academic sector?
So yeah, it is very different actually, and the whole kind of model of a success and that success consultant or whatever job title you got came about. Now, I didn't really know this until I joined, because software is now sold usually on a renewal basis. In the past, you probably had your own server in the basement, and you had that for a given period of time, be it 7 years or whatever. Software now is sold on a subscription basis. So therefore, customers can cancel that subscription at the end of that subscription period. So if you want to keep that subscription going, you have to make sure that customers are getting the best value from whatever piece of software it is, be it Leganto, which is reading lists, or Alma, which is your library management system. So in order to do that, you have to work with those customers to make sure and I know what it's like. You go through all the hassle of getting a piece of software in there, you just go, oh, thank God, and don't really push it and do what it is you want to do with it. So really, to answer your question, that my success, I'm only part of it, but my success would be based on how many people renew their subscription. You know, basically that's what it comes down to. So I'm part of that's to do with the account manager as well, but I will be part of that. And if all my customers suddenly went, oh God, I'm not using Leganto anymore, it's rubbish, then that would reflect badly on me. So it's about renewal.
How are we for time, Susie? Are we able to take?
Yeah, another question would be fine.
Great. Paul, I'll stick with you for a moment. Leanne asks, when you left your academic job, where did you look for new roles?
So I was really lucky, I must be honest. Somebody, because I've worked, I should have probably said this, but my background in academic libraries is systems, so I've always really worked with systems. And because Ex Libris, who are now Clarivate, really have cornered the market in academic library systems, I was approached by someone to apply for what was a maternity leave cover. That's not to say I didn't look elsewhere. I kept my eye on all the local institutions, so Northumbria, Sunderland, Durham, and public libraries. You know, it's a terrible thing to say, but I'm not that ambitious. I just wanted to do a good job, and luckily somebody approached me, but there's no magic to it, I don't think. I think it's about looking at your local institutions. But if I'm being honest, I hadn't considered corporate environment, and it's worth keeping your eye on people like Clarivate as well.
Thank you, Paula. Amina, this is something I was wondering about as well. How do your customers hear about your library?
Word of mouth. In Eldon Garden, people used to discover us because it was raining and they'd parked their car and they came. I mean, really, a lot of people came that way. A lot of men came because their wives were trying on bras in Bravissimo and they didn't want to go in, or they didn't want to hang out outside the shop, so they'd come and sit in the library. Apart from that, Twitter, Instagram, though I don't really get Instagram. I mean, I do my best, but I never figured out how to use it to best advantage. Facebook page. And well, the latest cohort of volunteers came because Natalie Paris, who's a French teacher, emailed all her students to tell them that we were unpacking and needed help. And so we had 10 or 12 students come. They do a couple of hours and it's brilliant, and they enjoy it. And we found the back wall, which is wonderful. We will, when we're actually open, we'll probably put a thing on the Gateshead website and stuff like that and fly the flag a bit louder. But first, we have to get the change of use approved. You wouldn't believe they wanted an ordnance survey map with a red line around the property. This property belongs to the council, but they go through this thing of they won't give you the map. You can buy the map from them and then post it back to them. But unless it's got a red line around it and saying which way is north, because they are, oh, Gateshead Library, right, interesting. Otherwise, we've got to buy it from the council. It's actually, they're telling me we can't get it from the last person who had change of use because it's their copyright, and actually it's Crown copyright, so I don't think they ought to be selling it in the first place. Anyhow, we've had the building since June, and the amount of jobs that have to be done by the council before we're allowed to open is just ridiculous. And people keep asking, when are you opening? And it's a question I can't answer. I thought it was the 1st of September last year. then it was Christmas, then it was Easter. Easter's not here yet, but we can't open in a week, you know. That's life.
Well, we look forward to when you're able to say, we are open, come rushing through the door.
If it makes you feel any better, Amina, my online collections portal was meant to go live on the 1st of July 2021. It happened last week.
Persistence is a virtue. Well, thank you so much to all our speakers. The demand for questions is just amazing, and thank you to all of you for generously sharing your email addresses. So if anyone who's been here this evening, you've asked a question and you're really disappointed that we didn't get around to answering it, all the speakers' emails are now in the chat. So find the email address of the person you want to know about and pop them an email. You can have a conversation to continue that from this evening. So thank you so much to our speakers. Thank you for those of you who've come, whether you're CILIP members, whether you're not CILIP members. We really appreciate any feedback you might have about this evening's webinar, and Melanie will paste our evaluation form into the chat. If you missed that at all, I will be sending out an email within the next week with the recordings for the lightning session, so we will include the evaluation link as part of that. It gives you an opportunity to tell us what other kind of topics and event you'd like us to see here doing in the North East. I know from looking at the participant list that we have people from far, far afield. You are very welcome tonight. Each June we have an annual event planning meeting as the committee. So any feedback you get now will be looked at as part of that meeting. So do let us know if you want to come and speak for us, what you'd like to speak about, or if there's topics or things that are important to your organisations, to your sectors, to yourself. We would love to hear from you. So remember that we have our Beyond the Horizon event in May and the visit to the Northumberland archives, which will be happening in June. So do watch out for your email and social media channels so when we do that promotion. Thank you very much again for coming, your willingness to join us this evening, maybe delaying your tea or whatever else you would normally be doing at this time. Maybe you're still at work and now you've got to get home later, or maybe you zoomed home and you're already at home. So whatever you do for the rest of this evening, thank you for coming, and particularly for our speakers, for your passion and enthusiasm about your sectors. And I just want to now ring you all up and go, so tell me a bit more about what you do. So I think our purpose for wanting to shine a lot in different sectors has certainly been achieved with all that you've sent. So thank you to our speakers. Thank you to those who've joined us, and have a welcome evening.